Cooler MasterAir MA610P ARGB CPU cooler. This is the CPU cooler I will be showing you how to install on the AM4 socket, and also doing some temperature testing. It may sound a little bit unfair, but we're going to actually put this thing up against two 240mm all-in-ones. Is that actually fair or not? There will be timestamps in the description below. If there's a certain part of the video you'd like to jump to, you're more than welcome to do so. There's some other links down there that may interest you. Don't forget to do all that fun YouTube stuff on your way down to that description box. Let's flip you over and I'll show you how to get this thing installed. So to get started with this process for today, we have everything laid out here that we're going to need. We have the CPU cooler with the fans. We have the two brackets dedicated for the AMD setup. We have the 4 clips that will attach these 4 little posts to the back plate. And yes, you will have to use the back plate with this installation. You cannot use the standard AM4 back plate, so you will have to use theirs. We do have the 4 posts that will attach to these, that will attach the cooler. We do have the 2 little screws here that will attach the brackets to the bottom of the heat sink. They also give you a little tool here to be able to put these standoffs on with that does go to a number 2 Phillips. We do have a little bit of thermal paste here that they provide, because you will have to add your own thermal paste to it. Up here we have some of the wiring, depending on your wiring situation. We do have the fan splitter that they give you. This is an ARGB cable for you, depending on which motherboard. And if you got a gigabyte motherboard, they say you'll need to use this one. You use ASRock or ASUS or MSI, you'll have to use this connector depending on your motherboard. The fans do come with the standard 3-pin 5-volt layout wire on it. So if you're going to be connecting it straight to your motherboard or a regular 5-volt system, you won't need this cable. If you don't have no other ARGB, or you don't have an ARGB header on your motherboard, they do have the box here laid out. That way you can still control your ARGBs and the cable that goes along with it if you do need to run that little box. Okay, as far as the tools that's needed, I do have my number 2 Phillips here. I do have an extension bit, 6-inch extension bit, which is number 2. And I do also have an iFixit screwdriver here with a number 1 bit in it. You will need this number 1 bit screwdriver for whenever you put the brackets onto the bottom of the air cooler. That's pretty well everything that you're going to need. Everything's laid out here for you to take a look at it. So let's start out by prepping the heat sink with the brackets, and I'll show you how to get that done. Alright, here we go. We're going to get the back plate prepped here. And for the AM4 sockets, you use these inner brackets here. It's a little bit elongated. That's where you're going to be putting these up through. Alright, and these little posts here, they do go up through the back part of the back plate that has a little bit of a, I don't know, it looks different. This side here is nice and flat and flush. This side's got indents in it. This is where these little posts are going to slide into. And turn around to where they sit down in there. Okay, and then AM4. Once you get them down in here, there is some play depending on which AM system you're putting them on. If it's AM3, AM4, AM2, whatever it may be. For the AM4 that we're using today, your standoff needs to be slid over towards the bracket that's sticking out the farthest. Then you take these little plates here, these little caps, and you slide them down over top of them. They do seem to be a pretty tight fit. And when you do this, you want to make sure that the clips with the little punch out that goes over top of the standoffs is facing outwards towards the standoffs. Just slide them down over. It should clip it into place. And you do all 4 of them the same way. Just like that, you get all 4 of them put on there. Like I said, they all do go on the same exact way, and you want to make sure the standoff itself is close to where the Intel brackets would go through. So let's get the CPU cooler over here and we'll get it prepped for installation. We have the cooler over here with the 2 AM4 brackets with the 2 little screws. First thing we're going to have to do is take these fans off. So let's go ahead and pop the fans off here. Of course, you'll have to undo the cabling here for them. Disconnect all the cabling there. There we go. Set the fans to the side, and you're down with just the heat sink with the top plate on it. And by looking at these brackets, guys, there is 2 different settings you can use depending on which AM platform you're using. By looking at the instruction manual, you need to slide the posts all the way to the inside, closest to the bracket. So we'll go ahead and do that. And you ask me, this is a little funky with the way they got this. You can see that there is a little lip sticking up on these brackets. This little lip needs to go back towards the heat sink. And you set them down in here in this little notch. Now, if you can see it, there's a little notch down in here that these set down into. And of course you want your screws where the heads is facing up towards the heat sink itself. And then the threaded port is facing down, of course. Okay, you just put it in there. Take your little screw here. This is where a number 1 Phillips is a must for this. I don't know why they didn't make these as a number 2 Phillips. But they did decide to go with a number 1 Phillips head screwdriver for this. Just slide the screw up through there. Get it started up into the plate and tighten her down. You don't need these real tight. Just, you know, about wrist tight. You don't need them real tight. You ain't sealing against water or nothing. And you just flip it over and you do the exact same with the opposite side of it. Alright, there we go. We got our brackets mounted down. We should have them adjusted to where they should be, where it should go right down on the AM4 platform. We also have our back plate now that is prepped and ready for installation. As far as the fans go on this, that will be one of the last things we put on, because you will have to have the fans off to be able to reach these mounting screws to be able to put it into the back plate once you get it on the motherboard. Let me get the motherboard over here that we'll use in today's example, and we will get that prepped and ready to go. Got everything laid out here we need. We have the motherboard prepped pretty much. We have the CPU in, we have the M.2 drive in, we have the heat sink in the back plate, which we done prepped. I have the 4 little standoffs and their tool to be able to tighten down them standoffs. Got the thermal paste. Got my magnetized tip number 2 Phillips screwdriver, plus my 6-inch extension bit, which is also magnetized. And I also have my spreader out here for my thermal paste. Seen my other videos of different school of thought. I like to spread mine out with them old school. So we're going to be using that as well. Okay, if you already have an air cooler on, you'll have to remove the air cooler. This is pretty well like a fresh build. If you're buying it and putting it on a fresh build, we'll have to take off these 2 plastic brackets here, which is pretty simple. You got 2 screws per bracket. Just take out the screws in each bracket and you get to pull the brackets up off. I do recommend holding on to these brackets. Some aftermarket coolers and AIOs will take advantage of these. I do keep mine in the motherboard box. That way that's where I keep most of my leftover components for my builds. That way if I ever do need them, I know where they're all at. Then you just take out the 4 screws, lift up the 2 brackets. Alright, and since we do have our back plate here that's already got our standoffs where we need them, this should be pretty simple. Should just be able to lift up the motherboard, remove the built-in back plate, because we can't use that with this cooler. You line up the standoffs with the screws and you push them up through. And I would recommend doing this on the motherboard box. This makes it a lot easier to do. Kind of holds that back plate up where it needs to be. Take your four standoffs here, which does look like there's some black plastic or black rubber on either side of them, so it don't matter which way they go down, I don't believe. And you take them, screw them down on your standoffs. Now, I just got myself in the habit of doing it. I do cross pattern and everything that I do. I don't know, it's just a habit that I've gotten into when working on computers. I'm gonna get them all just finger tight right now, and then I will go back with the tool that they provide and we will snug them down a little bit. You don't want to over tighten these because you don't want to mess up your motherboard. You don't want to break the traces inside your motherboard, so you don't want them real tight, but you do want to snug them down a little bit, I believe. We'll start out here and we'll give her a little bit of a snugging here, and we'll go over to this one. We'll do the same thing, and that should be pretty well it for the standoffs. Next, we're going to do the thermal paste. Like I said, there's different schools of thought on this. You know, if you've seen any other videos, I do spread mine out. I will be spreading mine out. I am old school. I am of age, you know. Some people say put a drop in the middle and let the cooler spread it out. Other people say spread it out. Other people say X pattern it. Me, I spread mine out. That way I know I got complete coverage. And if I do happen to put too much on, I know I can remove the excess, which it looks like I'm going to be taking some of this back off. But that's alright. I don't mind it. I'd rather have too much and take some off than not have enough and not have complete coverage. Your opinion may vary on this, but I'll be back when I get this spread out and have a nice little thin coat here for you. Alright guys, there we go. I think that's a pretty good application of thermal paste. When installing the cooler, I want to make sure the cooler master is facing the right way. So if you're looking at the bottom of the motherboard up, you want your cooler master facing the right way. And if we set up the brackets right, we should be able to just set this down on and screw it down on with no issues. It looks like they are lined up. And if any of you guys ever wonder why I use a 6-inch extension bit, these air coolers are a good example of why I use a 6-inch extension bit. Let's get these screws started here. There's one started. Jump over here, do the other, do the cross pattern on it. And this is one place where you really want to do the cross pattern because you don't want too much pressure on one side of the CPU over the other. When I did the standoff, it really don't matter, but when doing this, you do want to do it in a cross pattern. That way you don't get too much pressure on one side over the other. And you just do a couple turns on each one to get them started. And then you just bounce back and forth in your cross pattern, the same pattern that you used to get them started with. You can do this without the 6-inch extension bit, but the 6-inch extension bit does make it pretty nice. Since these screws are spring loaded, they should bottom out where you need them. Just like everything else, you know, you get them about wrist tight. You don't want to get them superly tight or anything. About wrist tight, and them springs should actually stop you from over tightening them. Yeah, that way you get the amount of pressure on them that you need. Okay, then we just go around here and we'll give them one little last torque just to make sure they're down where they need to be. Alright, now with that done up, now we can reinstall our fans on it. The fans will only install one way. You want to make sure your cables are spacing downwards. When reinstalling your fans, you want to make sure you hook up your RGB cables because your RGB does come through that top plate and then it feeds the fans. So if you don't hook your RGB cables back up, you will end up with fans without your ARGB. Once you get your ARGB cable hooked back up, you just slip the fan back on where it's supposed to be. Spread out the brackets and slide it back up there. Make sure you get the plastic up here lined up where it should be. And your fan should clip right back in the spot. And I don't know if you can see that on camera or not, but your ARGB cables that hook up back up to the head unit or the cooler itself is notched. They only go on one way. It is a proprietary 3-pin connector for them. So you want to definitely make sure you get them notches lined up when you hook these cables back up. Just like so. And you shove them down on there. Then you install the second fan the same way that you installed the other one. Alright guys, and after getting that fan there put back on there, I don't know if you can actually see that or not, but it looks like it may interfere with this inner RAM stick. So let me get a RAM stick and see if that's going to interfere with it or not. Alright guys, let's see if this fan's going to interfere with this inner RAM stick or not. This is something to take into consideration if you're going to be using 4 sticks of RAM with this cooler. Give it a nice little fit test here, see if it's going to interfere with it or not, which it may be different on your motherboard. Okay guys, I'm not going to be able to get that RAM stick in with that fan in place. It's sitting right here at the very top of it, at the top of the RAM stick. Let's see if we can get this RAM stick put in, then put the fan on, see if that makes a difference. Now guys, by looking at that right there, even with that G-Skill RAM in there, you do have to put your RAM in first, but it will actually fit with the taller heatsink RAMs. You just have to remember to put your RAM in before putting your heatsink, putting that fan back on. And for the cables that's coming off of this, you do have two fan cables, 4-pin PMW fan headers here, one for each fan. And you do have the ARGB header here, which is your standard 3-pin 5-volt ARGB header. Depending on your motherboard and how your system's set up, they do include a fan splitter for you. That way you can plug this into your CPU fan, and then you can split them off on both fans if you need to do that, which would actually be ideal to do. Depending on how your system's set up and how you configure your fans and how many fans you have, which in the system I'm using, I have other ARGB and other fans, so I will be using controller box or splitter cables for my fans. But on this motherboard, you can see right here that little gray header right there says CPU fan, and we have a CPU optional fan. Just to show you how to do it, I'm going to go ahead and connect each one of these fans, one to each one of these headers. Just like hooking up any other fan, it is notched, and it is a 4-pin PMW. Just line up them notches, and you slide it down over. Okay, then we're going to take the other one here, and we're going to put it on the CPU optional fan. Okay, of course, when I put it in the system, like I said, I do have fan splitters and whatnot that I'm running in the system. I'm going to be installing it on. So mine will be hooked up to them fan splitters and that fan control box. The ARGB on it is just like any other ARGB. And again, this is just like the fan headers, depending on the system and how your system's set up. But just to show you, I have an ARGB header right here, which is a 3-pin 5-volt header right here. Just to show you, I'm going to line up the pins right. We're going to line up the pins and push it down on there. There we go. And of course we'll have to install some RAM into it. That's pretty well the installation of it. There's the way it looks from the RAM RAM slot side. There's the way it looks. If you're looking into the case, there's what the top of it looks like. Of course, I don't have power hooked in, so you ain't going to see the ARGB, but I will get some shots of it once it's in the case and the RGB's hooked up to it. But that's going to be pretty well wrap up for the installation of it. Let me get it put in the test bench, and we'll do some stress testing on it, and we'll see how good this thing cools. Alright guys, I showed you how to get this installed on the AM4 socket. Let's flip you over here and we'll run down through the components that make up today's test bed. To start out with, we have the AMD Ryzen 7 5800X CPU, which this was ran in stock settings out of the box. We have the Gigabyte B550 ORS Pro motherboard. We do have G-Skills Ripjaws 5 series 16 gig, 2 8 gig sticks running 3600 megahertz speeds. The RAM was the only thing in the system that was overclocked. For the storage, we have the Silicon Power 512 gigabyte NVMe SSD. For the graphical power for today, we have the Gigabyte Radeon RX 5600 XT WindForce card. This was also ran at stock settings. The power supply, we have the EVGA 650 watt 80 plus gold semi-modular power supply. For the case, we have the Cooler Master Half XB Evo case. The coolers that we used in today's testing, we have the Cooler Master MasterAir MA610P ARGB CPU cooler. We put that against the Arigo AT240 240mm liquid cooler. And we also tested the Be Quiet Pure Loop 240mm all-in-one liquid cooling system. Like I said in the intro, is it actually fair to put this thing against the 240mm all-in-ones? When we get into the results, you may be surprised at how this actually came out. I know I was. About that GPU, yes, I know the 5800X could handle a lot better GPU than what I've got, but this is what I got on hand. I don't want to pay the high prices the GPUs are still hitting here in 2022, so this is what I used. So that makes up the components for today's test bed. Shows you how to install this on the AM4 socket. We ran down through the components that make up today's test bed. Now it's time to get into why and how I do my testing. I do run Cinebench R23 for the half-hour stress test. I run this 3 different times, back-to-back episodes. I believe within an hour and a half, it heats up at thermal paste and it spreads it out nice and even. So that's what I do for an hour and a half, which these workloads are unreal. Most people don't run the CPU and GPU at 100% usage. Speaking of the GPU, I do run Heaven Benchmark on a loop at 1080p in the background. That way the GPU is running at 100% as well, and putting as much heat as possible into the case. So that's the way I come up with my numbers, that's the way I do my testing, and that's why I do the testing the way I do. I showed you how to install this on the AM4 socket. I ran down through the components to make up today's test bed. I went through how I do my testing and why I do it the way I do it. Now it's time for what you've been waiting for, and that's the result. And see if this air cooler does any good when you put it up against the 240mm all-in-one. Let's flip you over to this fancy little chart I built, and we'll run down through these numbers. Alright, there you go. You can see in black is the max temperatures. The average temperatures is in orange. We have the Arigo AT240. The max temperature was 79.8. The average temperature was 74.8. For the Pure Loop 240mm, we had a max temperature of 81.6 and an average temperature of 77.4. And for the cooler in today's video, we have the MA610P. We have a max temperature of 68 and an average temperature of 64.7. So you can tell by looking at these numbers in today's video, this thing will actually outperform a 240mm all-in-one liquid cooler. That is, using the components that I use in today's video. Keep in mind that your case that you use does play a big impact on this, and also that GPU. If you're running a more powerful GPU, it will be putting more of a heat load inside your case. These are two factors that you will have to consider when you're doing your own build with this cooler. On Newegg and Amazon both, they say that this air cooler is 168.4 millimeters high, or something like that. It's under the 170 millimeters is what they state. But on the box, it states that it's 170.4 millimeters high. The Neo G case only supports air coolers up to 170 millimeters. That's why I could not use the case for today's testing. Once I got the system put into the case and I went to put the side panel on, the side panel would not fit. So definitely keep that in mind, that this air cooler is taller than what is advertised on Amazon and Newegg. What do I think about the Cooler Master MA610P ARGB air cooler? I think it's pretty sturdily made. By looking at the temperatures we got in today's test, I think it does the job very well for cooling the CPU. As I showed you in today's video, it stands up and does better than what a 240 all-in-one air cooler can do. I think it's pretty impressive for a tower style cooler. It's $20 to $30 cheaper than what the 240 millimeters are. I definitely recommend this cooler. It's got some pretty nice ARGB bling to it. It does very well with the cooling of the components that we had in today's system. So I think it's definitely worth the $80 that you pay for it. If you'd like to have more information about this cooler, there will be a link in the description box down below, along with some other links down there that may interest you. Don't forget to do all that fun YouTube stuff on your way down that description box. You all have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video or live stream.